Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lavinia Stamps and inks. Hope you enjoy! So I thought I would challenge myself to make a card that has the Elements inks in it rather than Distress inks or Distress oxides. So I started with some Mermaid ink and blended it lightly around the outside of my card. Now this piece of paper is 4.5 by 6.5 inches. So I've left enough room to add a border to my 5 by 7 inch card. Now to get the ink to come on very gently like this, I used the Ranger domed foam blending tools. And before putting it onto the paper, I just tapped off the excess ink onto my craft mat. And I built up the colors gradually, even though I want them to be quite vibrant on the background. I didn't want them to be splotchy and be too heavy-handed. So I started off really lightly and then gradually got darker as I went on. Now I decided to just stick to these two colors. So this is the Blue Lagoon, and I'm just deciding where I want this blue to go. And then once I'm happy with the placement of this color, I'll go back and add some more of that mermaid ink. Now I'm trying to keep the middle of the paper mostly white because I want that to be a bit of a focal point on the finished card. So I did blend some of that Blue Lagoon over the middle, but very lightly, so it's a very pale blue color. And now I'm just going in with the mermaid ink and making it darker around the edges of the card. Now these inks are very easy to use, especially if you're used to using distress inks. If you've only ever used distress oxides, you might find them a bit challenging at first, but then you'll get the hang of it. So I'm just going to blend those two colors together. And again, I'm focusing on the outside of the paper, trying to keep that inside mostly light. So once I'm happy with the blend on my background, I'm going to splatter some water on top. And to make the water droplets extra large, I'm just using the nozzle from my spray bottle and tapping it with my finger. And there were a few areas where I didn't get water, where I wanted water. So I'm just going to use the spray bottle and just tap it onto the paper. And then I'll heat this with my heat tool to make sure that my background is completely dry before I add some stamping onto it. Now my main fairy on the card is the fairy called Finn, and I'm just going to stamp her with some Nocturne ink. And I'm going to have her looking up at the top of the card. Now I had the idea that I would have Finn in a bit of a mystical forest looking up at the trees. And to make the tree, I'm going to use one of the wreath stamp sets from Lavinia. This one is called the Floral Wreath Set, and it's a set of 3 different stamps, and I'm going to use the larger stamp to create my tree. Now I'm just going to stamp this larger stamp a few different times so that it takes up the top portion of the card. And I'm just going to tilt the stamp each time so that it looks like a large tree at the top. And to fill in that corner, I'll just use the first part of the stamp. And it looks like one continuous piece. And I'll just have it come down a little bit more on the end there. Now there is another 2 stamps in this set. I'm going to use the one that looks like a little tendril, like a vine. And I'm going to stamp this on either side of the card to help to create a bit of a frame. And I just love how this stamp, it can be stamped in a continuous line. It's very easy to line up so that your vine looks like one long piece. Now to make this a little bit more magical, I'm just going to stamp a few of the bubbles. And I'm using the smallest bubble and the medium-sized bubble. There is a third bubble that comes in the set, the large bubble, but I didn't use that here. And then on the left-hand side, I'm going to add more of those vines. And I love the effect that this creates. It sort of looks like a hidden forest or a magical forest that the fairy has just discovered. So I'll just add a few more vines on the front here until I'm happy with it. And then I can fix the image of Finn, the fairy, on the front of the card. And I'm just using an oil-based pencil. This is a polychromo pencil, just to darken up the area on Finn's leg that didn't quite stamp perfectly. And because the VersaFine ink is oil-based and this pencil is oil-based, it blends quite well together, so the recipient would never know any different. Now once I'm happy with that, I'm going to color in her wings, and I'm using some of the Moonlight pens, and I'm using the turquoise and the purple color, and I'm also using the Stardust in clear just to fill in those little areas on the wing and make her look more magical. Now I'm going to use that same Stardust clear pen to color in her hair and also to add some more sparkle to this card. Now when you're using these pens, just be careful because they do take a few moments to dry, so it's very easy to smudge them with your fingers or your hand until they're completely dry. So one thing I discovered about these pens is they're quite versatile, as you'll see shortly. Not only do they work well just coloring like this, but you can also use them to watercolor. So what I'm going to do is just add little bits of this color, this is still the Stardust clear, onto the tree leaves above Finn. And I'm just putting this roughly over each of those pods or the leaves. And then once I've added all of that sparkle, I'm just going to use a little paintbrush with water and just gently blend this pen. Now this gives you the beautiful effect of using a sparkle pen, and it also lightens up the areas underneath those pods because the water will cause the ink to lighten. So it gives you a beautiful effect. I'll show you a close-up in a second so you can see how sparkly this is in real life. Just gorgeous. Now I'm also going to do a similar thing on the bubbles, but I'm first going to add some of the Stardust in green and pink to the outside of the bubbles. I'll show you a close-up of this in a moment. And that just helps to make them look more like bubbles. And then I'm going to add a bit more of that clear Stardust into the center of the bubbles and then blend that with some water on top. And once again, this will cause the Lavinia Stamps Elements ink to lighten, so behind the bubbles will look almost white. Now once this has completely dried, I'm going to add some glossy accents onto those bubble areas just to make them look more like bubbles, and I'll set this aside to dry. Meanwhile, I'll work on my card base. So this is a 5 by 7 inch card base, and I'm going to add the stamp called Creativity. This says free your inner creativity. And then I'm also going to add one of the fairy foragers onto the top corner of this stamp, so it looks like she's perched on top of the sentiment. This would be a great all-occasion card or note to send to a friend. Now once my background is dry, I'm just going to add a few more touches before I attach it to my card blank. So I'm going to use a C7 Copic marker, and I'm just going to darken some of the areas between those pods or leaves to make this look more like a tree. And I think this really helps, and it only takes a few seconds. And I'll hold it up so that you can see how well that glossy accents works on making those bubbles look three-dimensional. Now I'm going to use a piece of black paper behind my card to add a little bit of a frame. So this black paper is 4 3/4 inches by 6 3/4 inches. So that when I adhere it to my 5 by 7 inch card blank, I'll still see a little bit of white around the black border. And once that's attached to my card blank, my card is finished. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!